So I think there is this obvious reason why we choose this movie to this program, which is Breaking the Bars, which also because the relation of the representation of two prisons, two kind of prisons, the closed prison, the jail you went, but also this open prison that is Palestine. But first of all, I wanted to ask you a little bit of how did you, because this is your first movie, so how was the process of doing this movie? Why did you go to the
so yeah, this was my first film, and as I mentioned before, the idea was to make a film about my prison experience as a teenager. I was 17 years old when the first Palestinian uprising, Intifada, started. And many young people went to prison during that time. So I went back to, after finishing my studies in Cologne, I went back and I started doing some kind of research about my time in prison. And while traveling in the country, I was more convinced that it's in fact a film about the whole country as a prison. And there were traces of Palestine becoming a prison everywhere. Everywhere we went, there were these signs there that made me change my mind. And in fact, my personal story that I begin with the prologue in the film is just really opening up this whole, visuals that I'm presenting and experiences that I'm collecting between Ramle and Jaffa, where I was born in Ramle, but I grew up also in Jaffa. So at the same time, it was as well a kind of a search for a cinematic language. I was just starting to make films. And that's why the film is a kind of collection of moments, of characters, stories, and things that simply happened during the shooting, like the accident that you see, and many things that I would find, like going to have a coffee in Tel Aviv, and then I get the sugar, and there are all these pictures with Zionist figures and simply other Jewish personalities. They just mix it up. So it was really a kind of voyage that I'm doing in my past and in the country today, and a search for cinematic language.
And also, how was the relation, because in the movie there is a kind of unique relation to time and space, the impression, so you construct a really particular, and I wanted to ask if there is any relation between the relation in time with the time in jail that you can live, and also the relation with space, living in a country that is being destructed and alienated, so how these both...
I think one thing that I took from my time in prison is really to stare and to wait. And this is something that this is almost I think already 30 years ago, but I still have this kind of flashbacks that come from time to time. The language of the film is very much really about coming from this experience of being imprisoned, and you are surrounded by walls, and all you have is really these walls around you, and that's why you see in the film all these walls appearing again and again everywhere. Different forms of walls. Some of them are new, some are being built. So really, in a way, taking the time and traveling through the space and time is a crucial part of this film and my work in general after.
Malak, so Malak Mattar, a painter which is from Palestine and from Gaza. We are having an exhibition of her work in the Musée, so you should really go see it, which is wonderful. So I first wanted to ask you a little bit how did you start painting, because I think you were really young when you started painting, yeah. And how you created this relation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been really waiting for this discussion to happen. Well, when you go to the exhibition, I would love for you to also, on your right hand, go check the exhibition of LA Rebellion, which I really fell in love with the pieces and the videos. And I had the honor to meet also the LA Rebellion during my stay. Growing up in the Gaza Strip, to be honest, I have really wonderful memories. Because I grew up in an artistic family that really, that art felt really organic. Growing up listening to Arabic music in the morning and to seeing my uncle making art and developing his practices in different mediums. His name is Muhammad Msallam, and he was the one who introduced the installation art into the Gaza Strip when it was not even known, given the concept of the blockade and the cultural siege, etc. But when I was 8, I experienced, I would say, my first death. I was going to my school for my final exams, and I was only in my 2nd grade, and suddenly the school turned upside down, and teachers were running into the classrooms, asking us all to go home. And when I left, it was such a surreal scene because hundreds of students wearing the UNRWA uniforms going out in such a gloomy, gray day. When I looked up, I saw the military planes and the sound of the helicopter. And once I arrived home, my mom, she dropped me home. And I felt, yeah, it was just my school getting, maybe emergency. And it turned into a war. And being in such state, it has developed so much tension within me, because you hear a bombardment sounds that is beyond the capacity of your own ears. So basically, when I hear the sounds, I think that I'm not gonna hear again because it's so sorry, because it's so loud. So going back to school, I actually learned about war and its consequences more from the school than actually being in war. Because you see this class, and I saw the classmates who lost their family members, who lost their homes, who were mourning the death in the first few weeks of the school. But that was not the only war. In 2012, 2014, 2021, I have witnessed all these Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. But the year that has really transformed my life was in 2014. I was drawing as any kid, but it was not a path that I chose or something that I knew since I was little. I chose to become a painter in 2014. We had 52 days of Israeli bombardments. Several thousands of Palestinians were killed. And in my street, in front of me, just in the next building, I saw a horrific scene of how an old neighbor, she was killed, but in a way that you don't see her body. Her body is shattered. And then you see her husband mourning the death of this, of her wife, of his wife. And then when I went there, I was in Gaza just last week, and the ruins of the building stayed, and someone has wrote recently on the walls of this house, "I wish you were never gone," on the ruin of the house. So seeing this scene, I felt like death was coming just now. And in a way, for me to process this and escape this tension and the feeling of losing life as a young girl, I tend to go to the medium of art, sketching. And the first medium that I used was watercolor, which was an award from my school. I was painting every single day in a very consistent and a very passionate way. I painted my own feelings, and I also painted the prison that I felt inside me. Because growing up in the Gaza Strip, you cannot help but internalize the prison inside you. When you go to the sea, you see that the occupation has drawn the horizon of the sea. When you look at the sky, it's pretty much occupied by the drones and military planes. And when you go to the land, we don't even, when we speak about the borders of Gaza, we say from minesilik lasilik, from wires to wires, because it's literally a prison. It's not only a metaphor. So growing up, I couldn't help but feel it was such an imprisonment inside me. And I also struggled as a woman, because as an artist, I felt like I needed freedom so much to practice, but I couldn't feel it. And maybe I can talk how I lived the Gaza Strip, which is a story by itself. But yeah, that was a long answer. No, but yeah, in 2017, well, I had my first solo exhibition when I was 15 years old, in collaboration with the institution 28, sorry. And after this, like the media started, local media, but also international media started featuring my story as an artist, using the medium of art to transform her trauma into, story. And it was really like, it went viral, and I started getting invitation, despite of my young age and despite my, small experience or tiny experience in the practice of painting. But I think the story itself of being able to create in a place of massive destruction and a lot of loss and pain was something that I very much demonstrated in my artwork. However, when I started painting, my painting were quite influenced by what I saw, so I used bloods, destruction of buildings, a mother and her kid who were killed under the rubble. So all these scenes that were stuck on my mind as a kid, and the graphic scenes were pretty much into my canvas. But then in 2017, I told my family, like, look, I want to leave, because I was having like international exhibitions in the UK, France, etc., but I was never able to leave. So my paintings had more freedom of movement than I did, despite of the censorship of the Israeli Mail Office of any political work is subjected to confiscation. So, of course, this proposal was taken as a joke, like, what are you talking about? Because the travel of young women, single women, without a man is something that is not only unacceptable, but is something that is not questionable. So after having like discussions with my family, etc., I told them, they told me, if you get the top in matriculation exams, so it's like the year before your university, it's a useless system because you have to compete with a lot of people. But I got the top in the country after studying and studying. So when I told my family that, okay, I got the top, etc., they accepted, but then I have the border in front of me, which is another arrangements, another months of waiting to get the permission to have my name in the list of the Egyptian, like for the Egyptians to give me my permission to leave the besieged Gaza. But then I had to lose 1 year of waiting for the border. And when I had to cross from, oh my God, that's an emotional moment. Okay, I have to cut. But
okay, we'll come back maybe later to it. I think we have the privilege to have you from Gaza. You're 22 years old. You've known a certain period of the occupation and the wars that have opposed Israel and Palestinians. You are 50. You talk about a side which is not the same, which is more about inside Israel, somehow an occupation of and the destruction of the roots of territories and the current occupation. So you have besiegement, you have occupation. We have the privilege to have Elia Suleiman, who's maybe 150 years old here, who has been working, I mean, at least one of his movies was more about the border or the connection between Cisjordania and Israel and the lack of discourse that you could apply on the situation. And maybe first, thank you for coming and to speak up and to bring this voice out of these places and allow us to have a sense of what is going on there. And maybe a second question, which maybe should be a subject of discussion between you three, or in which you will have different answers, which is, we saw a Kazakh movie, which we consider to be very important, which is in competition this year, about a poet. And this poet, which is a historical figure of the 19th century of resistance to Russian colonialism, was a poet and also a political actor. And the filmmaker who was here told us about the importance of poetry and creation as a political act of resistance. And maybe the question I would want to ask you, do you consider your art as a resistance per se? Do you think it can be sufficient as an act of resistance? Do you feel that, on the contrary, it can give some kind of relief, not in the good sense, but to people who, just by seeing your works, will consider it sufficient, and showing your works will consider it sufficient, and will let the rest of the population keep on suffering the consequences of occupation and war?
I mean, it's not even a matter of choice, I have to say, because if you are a Palestinian and you want to write poetry, or make films, or to paint, you would find yourself expressing, what you are experiencing, your feelings, what you are seeing, and the stories that you carry with you. I mean, I grew up knowing that we stayed in Palestine just by chance because of bad weather. And I grew up in a house where the second floor is unfinished. As a child, I was playing with my sisters and my brother on the in this unfinished rooms with no roof. And then I asked my father one day, I think I was 11 or 12, I was trying to understand why the second floor is unfinished, and then he told me the story of the house. And then I told him, can you take me to the house of my grandparents? So he said to me, yes, we will go one day there. And I think a year later I insisted, and then he said, okay, let's go there. So we walked, this is still in Ramle, we walked to this area, which is now has no Palestinians anymore. It's just a Jewish area. And we stood there, and of course there was no house. It was just a place with empty space. And for me, this whole experience very much impacted my work and the way I saw things as a human being, and then later on as an artist, as someone making films. So it's not something that you can separate. And especially since I'm someone who believes that filmmaking art is a personal expression form, and also politically speaking, there's no way but really to touch upon all these issues that we grow up with, we see every day. I mean, the Palestinian tragedy is not, it's not just what happened in 1948, and I think the unbelievable theft and destruction of an entire country. It's still going on until today. It's every day. The occupation of Palestine never ended. And you could look at it in both ways. I mean, sometimes I think it makes me quite hopeful, because I think that trying to occupy a country for such a long time, it's almost 75 years, is a failure, is an absolute failure. And going then to Sheikh Jarrah and wanting to take more homes, going to Jaffa and wanting to take more homes, going to the south of Palestine, to Nakab, and wanting to kick out all the Palestinian Bedouins from their land. It's a sign of failure. And in that sense, I think there's, as long as things are not settled, there is still hope. And I think this is something that the Palestinians manifestate every day, because they fight, they exist, they create, they live. And I don't think that there is a way to take this, there is a chance to take this away from us.
I mean, I can keep on asking questions, but maybe this question of exile, the three of you live abroad, the first question would be, did you feel forced to leave? Or did you feel there was a choice in there? Was it a mixture? And how do you live with this presence distance, with this?
You know, the experience of the Palestinians inside Israel, or what we call 1948 Palestinians, is very, very special. Because the system itself, by definition, the state is a Jewish state. Basically, it's exclude anyone who's not Jewish. You feel that you are a stranger in your own country. It's like being an immigrant in your own country. It's something very, I think psychologically is very damaging. And I remember when I went to Germany to study, and people would ask me, so how is it for you to live abroad? And did everything change for you? And in a way, it didn't, because I always felt myself as an immigrant. And it was very natural for me to find myself living somewhere else. And at the same time, and that's the reason why I opened the film with the quote from the Palestinian writer Anton Shammas, who lives in the US, where he says that we never leave home. We drag it behind us, walls and all, wherever we go. And I think there's no really separation between the experience of exile and the experience of being Palestinian from Palestine. It's really very, very much interweaved together, and especially that it's not really possible to escape, because Palestine is in the news, and Palestine is seen as well everywhere. When you travel to places in Latin America or even in the US, and you see certain conditions where African American communities live in ghettos, I see myself as part of these people, because this is the way we live. The same with the kind of art we create today in Palestine. I mean, for me, the most amazing art coming from Palestine today is music and hip-hop. And this experience manifested itself in art, because we live in ghettos. We live in these conditions that, you know, are similar to other conditions in the world. And I see myself as part of this whole, of people of the margins, basically.
Like when I was little, I think I was a very curious kid. I always wanted to learn beyond the border of my own city, which felt really limiting. So I watched movies, films by Ilyas Liman when I was in an open-air prison. I read writings by Angela Davis when I was in an open-air prison. I listened to music by Marcel Khalifa and read poetry by Mahmoud Darwish when I was inside this prison. So in a way, I tried to find my way through it, and not to only give up on the idea that because I'm subjected to this blockade, which is not only political, but it's cultural, psychological, It's the idea and the humiliation of being isolated from humanity and from humans. I remember seeing expats in the Gaza Strip. I always felt intrigued. What are these people? What language do they speak? And what's their culture like? For me, that was a surprise. Even when I was going to Jerusalem, ironically, by a permission from the American embassy to attend a group exhibition of Palestinian people, of Palestinian artists, I was so amused by the accent of Palestinian in Jerusalem. I never heard that. I was so amused by the music that I listened to and the streets I walked through and the sea I saw in Haifa and Jaffa. For me, I was so lucky to see this because I knew 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip did not see that. When I left, and why I got emotional when I was 17, because of the struggle that I witnessed from the Egyptians that humiliated a lot of people, the patients, the young people, how they treated us, just like how our occupation treated us. And it hurts because in the back of my mind, and Egypt and us, we were very much similar. We watched their cinema and we listened to their music. If you speak to any Palestinian from the Gaza Strip and you are Egyptian, they would speak to you in an Egyptian accent. This is how much we were connected. So it feels like this is a kind of betrayal. But anyway, when I left the Gaza Strip as a young woman, when I said goodbye to the family, I felt like, am I betraying my own family and leaving them in a war zone when another war is unpredictable? Because I knew that when I leave, coming back is going to be very hard. But I tried my best to come 3 years after, and I became a survivor of another attack of 2021. So it feels like the trauma keeps reopening and reopening. And I ask myself, because in August, the last attack that happened, and I have to mention this because it's a tribute that you will see in the exhibition, of the young artist. She was my age, she was going to an art school, she was painting expressionist portraits expressing the siege and her own feelings and her own limitation. She was killed by the occupation, but her paintings stayed. And that's the power of art, that although they can break our spirits and they can kill us and terminate our lives, but there's this kind of resilience that I found very much, like I asked myself, is that even possible? And once I remember in 2021, what I do, it's kind of a ritual. When the ceasefire is announced, I ask my father to go on a tour in the city to see what's been erased and to see what has been like the landmarks of the city and how much it has changed with the amount of bombardments that took place. So I remember in May 2021, how the shop owners were cleaning their houses, they're cleaning their shops just a few hours after the ceasefire. And we spent days sleep deprived because of the amount of bombardments that were unstoppable in the city, killing and terminating and ending entire families from their family registry. And I saw how young children, they were dressed in the Eid, which is an important like Islamic celebration, and they were dressed, but the Eid were spent in the times of war, so we did not celebrate it. We postponed the celebration. And how much the city continues to live without time for mourning. It's like we move forward so fast in a way that I ask, what are we made of? And I'm so proud to be from this place that has never ever lost hope, when it's very much it's very much been abused and distracted, and we've been subjected to so much violence and so much inhumanity that it makes you question why am I alive and why I'm here. So going through this experience has really given me so much hope. And for me, I like to think that life in Gaza is possible because it's my home. Although I'm a refugee in the Gaza Strip, like 70–80%, but that doesn't mean that I cannot call it home, because it is. While I'm speaking, I do feel the presence of my grandmother when she was telling me about her village that she displaced from when she was only a few years ago, like 7 years. And I also feel the presence of my mother, who's one of the most wonderful Palestinian women. She started working really young. She took care of her family. She always pushed me to become an artist, and she bought art material for me as well. Okay. Why do I keep crying? But yeah, I think when I think about it, I didn't say that I escaped death for 4 times, which is the number of bombardments I lived. I say to myself, I was blessed with life for 4 times in my life. And that's the power of, and that's the desire of life. When you desire life and you look at life and you try to not to think about death even when it surrounds you wherever you go. So yeah. I don't know, maybe because I did not sleep yesterday, I'm emotional.
That's our fault.
That's my fault.
Yeah, so also I wanted to ask you how it is to be an artist, Palestine artist outside. So we were speaking about that also, about the expectation that people from outside have about like how should it be, the story that should be told by Palestinian, the way that it should be told. So all this outside expectation, how like sometimes Palestinians should be seen only as survivors and not on something else which is more than that also. So how do you did you have this experience? How did you deal with that in being an artist outside?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, with my first film, with my first experience working professionally, I had huge difficulties because the film was co-produced by the second German TV, and the commission editor would come every 2 weeks to watch what I'm doing because I was editing the film myself. And he was just sitting there and writing notes and then, you know, discussing afterwards with me what I should change. And he hated the film because I wasn't supposed to make art. For this commission editor, I was someone who you know, filming this place, this conflict, and I should more or less confirm what he knows about Palestine from what he read in his daily newspaper. And at some point he became very annoyed of me and what I'm doing with this film. And then he told me, but your family, they look like Italians, they don't look Palestinians. And then he told me, why did they talk so softly? Because this man, all he knows about Palestinians is what he sees on TV when there is something terrible happening. Someone just got killed, or a bombardment of Gaza, and people are in hysteria. And it was impossible for him really to imagine that these are normal people. And of course, I was young, and I believed that I could change him, and I would bring him a book of Edward Said to read as a present in Christmas, but it didn't help. It didn't help at all, and it got worse and worse. And then actually, to finish this film, it's really a long story. One day I want to make a film about it, a comedy, because at some point, I'll just make it short because it's a long story, but at some point, because they were asking me to make changes, to make things clear and to be less poetic, because the film is too poetic, he told me. And one day, he came and said, okay, you cannot finish this film. We will make a break, and then you think about it. And then the production company asked me to give back the keys for the production house, for the office. So I gave him back the keys. And I left. And of course, a week before, I imagined this happening, so I made copies of the keys. I knew that it's going to happen. They're going to ask me for the keys. So yeah, so I was living with still at the time with my friend who was studying with me from Colombia, and I told my friend Juan, tonight we're gonna go to the office and take the film material. And say, okay, I come with you. So we go to this place at like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, like professionals, and it was a very stormy night in Cologne. And I arrived to the building of this production company, and I see that the tree had fallen on the door. So, despite all of that, we decided, okay, we're gonna go. And so I went in, and I had a bag with me, and there was this, at the time, we filmed with mini DV. So I saw the box, so I took all the mini DVs from this box and I put it in my bag and I closed the box again. And I left. And I started editing the film by myself. That's why I ended up editing the film, because they wouldn't give me an editor. And meanwhile, they were communicating with me, you know, setting up new conditions for me to come to edit, and then I'm negotiating with them, and I'm editing, in fact, the film. And I finished the film 6 months later, and without them even discovering that the material is not there. And then it was premiered in Film Marseille, and it got a prize there, and I was in Arte giving an interview, and they saw it. It's a crazy story. I was really crazy to do that. I mean, so they sued me, in fact. And they sued me for €500,000 or 6 months in prison. And this didn't scare me because I was in prison already. And I was sure they won't do it finally, because, you know, you have to be really crazy to... but I was in court for almost 1 year about this film, and I have endless documents. And finally, I was really lucky, because at some point it was really a real court with 3 judges, and so at some point I told my lawyer, "Can I say something?" And said, "Yeah, sure, talk." And I said, "Yeah, I don't understand what they want from me, because this film has traveled a lot, and we had disagreements because they wanted to impose. One of the big things that they wanted to change in the film is to have a voiceover explaining everything." And I said, you know, this is a personal film. I mean, I've made a film about my life, my family, my country, and I don't understand what they want from me, because the film is already done and it's traveling. They can have it, and that's it. And then the judge looks at the lawyer of the other side and tells him, "Yeah, what do you want from him?" And this was the end of the story, really. But it went on and on for almost 1 year of really courts and you know, letters from the courts, and you know. So my first film was this experience, and since then I produced my own work. I became a producer as well. So I learned a lot from this experience, and but I would say really the main issue, which remains the same until today, I mean, especially in Germany, which is really a nightmare place for a Palestinian at the moment. Because our existence as Palestinian is basically sabotaging the happy end of the creation of Israel. I mean, it's very basic. For them, this is happy end. No, there's no happy end. It's a very tragic end. I think, especially, I mean, it's really difficult to make art and to create and to be a filmmaker, no matter where you come from. But I think, especially if you are a Palestinian, if you are representing the unknown other, if you are a black man, a woman, black woman, if you are any kind of other that doesn't fit, in fact, to their imagination of who they are, you will get into troubles. And you have to be really strong enough and smart enough to find your way and finally create and fight for your own film, for your own language, and find it for your own cause. Because I don't see a separation between the cause of art making, the way I see it, and where I come from. It's the same. That's why, you know, what you answered at the beginning, you know, the kind of language that I use in my work is coming from where I come from. It's not something that I discovered in films. Yes, I did study films, I did watch films, and you know, we grew up in a society where we had so many great icons. Writers, Mahmoud Darwish, Emil Habibi, and then, of course, my dear friend Elias Suleiman in cinema, who inspired, he's not here, he left. Yeah. Who inspired really a generation of young people to make films, and to make films starting from your own story. So all of that was for me quite helpful while fighting back, because I'm not alone in that sense.
Your story is an impersonation of Palestinian resistance, no? Even the keys, I mean, signifies and rings a bell with I mean, all these Palestinian families who keep their keys of the houses. There is this, then there is the scene of the tree, which looks like a Suleiman movie, seeing the fact that the tree is blocking the, and then, yeah, this fight for, I mean, it is as if you had been put in the position of creating a mise en abîme of the story of the people and the territory you came from. It's quite impressive. And maybe subconsciously they wanted to make you go through all this, actually, to make you...
Maybe, you know, things don't happen, like, there are no coincidences in that sense. You know, you think sometimes, with time, you experience so many things in your life, and at the beginning you think, oh, this is a coincidence, but in a way, there are a lot of things at play, and I think our persona somehow attracts certain things. Before making this film, I made a short film during my studies. And this was a film about the abandoned, empty office of Iraqi Airways in Geneva, in Switzerland. And when I made the roof, I realized why I saw this office in Geneva, because I grew up in such a place. I was born in a place that is half abandoned, and where time somehow was frozen. So this is the part that I in a way, I enjoy, because it's mysterious. I mean, you think that you are choosing the subject, but finally the subject is choosing you.
And we can feel that in both your works. For example, there's this, the way you try to metaphorically show how difficult it is to circulate and live with this scene with the bulldozer in your movie. It's a very discreet and poetic way to actually try to make a broader point. And in your paintings, it feels as if you had, at first, so you were more figurative, you were showing more explicitly the violence you were confronted to, and progressively, it is as if you had decided to embody all this violence in faces, in portrayals of individuals, but the violence would remain behind the surface and would not be explicitly visible. And it's interesting also to see that you try to express it through a form of art which reminds us of art naïf, in a sense, which brings us to ask ourselves, does a way to resist oppression is to play something or to try to renegotiate something around childhood, or and distancing ourselves with norms and formalism? I would want to ask you that question.
Yeah. Like, I think art has started for me as a way of self-expression, in a way to deal with my own traumas in a time where mental health assistance was not something that was in reach for the public. Just for you to know, over 1 million of the population of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are children. 91% have PTSD, post-traumatic symptoms, after like the series of attacks and you know. So I was also a kid who grew up with depression, with a lot of difficulties in communication, my own feelings and in my own thoughts. So art has helped me so much to grow as a person and also grow as a woman. And also made me very much aware of my own surrounding, of my own, of the things that, as Kamal said, sometimes the subjects choose you. And this is what happens. The stories of women that I've grown up with and I have been very much affected by are on my paintings. For example, the painting of giving birth in a prison cell. And it's a painting that started after reading the description of Anhar Dik, was like a Palestinian prisoner. She was in her last month of pregnancy, and she was almost giving birth in a small prison cell. So she wrote a very heartbreaking letter, but also an urgent letter asking the international community to react and release her, because she was terrified of giving birth in such unprepared place of giving birth, which is a prison cell, given the humiliation of how the soldiers, of how the prison guards treat the Palestinian prisoner. Thankfully, she was released, but I think the trauma is living in her and living with her baby. But I do think that, and also I would like to add that there are Palestinian prisoners who gave birth in the prison cell, like Zakiya Shammout. She's the first Palestinian prisoner. She has given birth with the help of other prisoners. So she did not even go to the hospital for labor. And I ask myself, when is this going to happen? In such a time where medical health is so much needed in times of pregnancy. And in general, like, having freedom is so valuable that nobody should ever be sentenced to, for example, death penalty, etc. So, for example, I'm recalling now the children of the village Haris. They were assumed to be throwing stones, and they are now sentenced to 15 years in Israeli prison. And to note, there are over 250 Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli prisons at the very moment. So the concept of prison has something that has very much evolved since my early beginnings as a painter, both from my personal, feelings, but also from the stories that I've heard of Palestinian prisoner. But last year, there was a very viral story, and this is a cause that I would really like to highlight, which is how Palestinians, they put their life in risk in the sea to seek asylum in Europe. And one of the things that I cannot forget and it went very viral is a man calling his mom and he's saying, "The fish is eating us in the sea." And that was from Turkey to Greece. And this man happened to be in the same bus that I took from Gaza to Cairo last week, and with his mom. And his mom was like, she was so much trying to break the trauma of this young man who grew up loving the sea, swimming in the sea every single morning, to a man who was terrified from touching the sea and even looking at it, and even looking at the fish, because he saw the fish as a threat. And this is how the trauma, it complicates your relations with the nature and your relation with your surrounding and the people around you. So it was so striking to see how this man, when he was telling the story, he was very much descriptive when he said how the boat flipped with his friends. They were trying to swim, but the clothes were stuck in the boat and they were not able to swim, but he was the only one surviving. After 6 hours of swimming, he finally arrived, and he was going to Egypt in a way also to heal his like to disconnect from what he has gone through. So this is the causes I would like to highlight, the cause of the Palestinian prisoners and their struggle in giving pregnancy, and also how much in times of when you have no choice, your minds kind of tell you that the sea can be safer than the land. And that's why over 100 of Palestinians have lost their lives in the past few years from the boats. So yeah, this is what I wanted to highlight. And these are also the causes that I deeply advocate through my artwork. And I hope I'm able to contribute a little bit into raising this awareness into very important matters.
Someone wants to ask something?
Thank you for your film. I was watching it and thinking about the woman that wants to be a lawyer or a judge. And I was thinking, well, your sister, where is she today? Where are her dreams? And she's a lawyer. Okay. Thank you. And I just want to thank you for being here and sharing with us this deeply troubling injustice that doesn't have an end. And that's it. Just want to thank you.
Thank you so much for the film, but also Malak for the beautiful paintings and for the discussion we're having today. And my question is for both of you. You talked a little bit after the question about the expectation that the world has from you. So like it's already resisting so much when you want to talk about Palestine, not to repeat what people are expecting you to hear, because I mean, you need to say what you want, but I'm a Palestinian myself also, and one of the difficulties I have is exactly how do I describe, how do I actually tell the people what Palestine is when we are really living in a prison and people, I think people don't have the imagination enough. So sometimes I think I don't have the words to actually use to tell people what it is to be Palestinian. So how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you overcome the gap that exists, because our experience in Palestine has been kept so far away from the world. Not just that, the world sees one type of reality that is a small part of what we go through every day. So in a sense, it's almost like there is no language that is common enough to pass. That's my feeling, at least. So I was wondering, you as artists, how do you deal with that? How do you have some way to be able to actually communicate, I don't know how, but communicate the experience of being Palestinian with people who have never been in Palestine? And if you don't, what do you do? If you don't know how to communicate that, what are you doing then? Mm-hmm. But maybe you do.
Thank you so much for your question. In a way, I'm not very concerned what the world expects me to paint, because the world can have different assumptions and they can have different expectations. Some, they would expect you to paint tragedy, some would expect you to paint, but it's the matter of being yourself. And for me as a young painter, it's also, it will be a long journey to be myself. But I do think staying truthful to my own origin and my background and my story. And I do believe that you as a Palestinian, you have a story to tell, where your ancestor came from and your origin and what's special about your own city and why you love your city. I do think these personal stories are very important in telling what's Palestine for you, for the others to know what is Palestine. But the thing is, I try, like when I paint, I don't paint based on the conscious of the people and what they know and they should know. I think when there's a story that has to be told, the artist has to tell it. and not wait for the right moment. No, if you feel like it's worth sharing, then share it without overthinking, because sometimes overthinking can kill the idea. So I would say start with personal story and also recommendations of books, of arts, I would tell the people that I think people are responsible to learn, to educate themselves, to learn as much, because when we talk about the Palestinian cause, we talk about a very prominent cause. So sometimes I think that people have to be responsible to learn, because in a way, when I speak in the US, I tell people that there is a moral responsibility, because your tax that you paid for your government is actually going to fund the occupation of Israel, the military, and it goes to murder my own people. In last year by itself, $3.3 billion have been wired to Israel for its advanced military to be experienced on our own bodies of flesh and bones. So I do think that the world has to build, individuals have to know that there is also responsibility that they should take to at least be educated about the cause, and to also go beyond their comfort zone. Learn, challenge your own ideas. You can be wrong, and that's okay. Keep learning, keep talking, keep connecting with people. And I think that's what I personally think. I don't know what's...
You said everything. Yeah, probably as you have experienced, it's really not easy to be a Palestinian. So you often find yourself in these situations where, people expect you to be in a certain way, or I don't think one should be really too busy with expectations and what they think about us, but rather really just doing what we are doing, whether we are artists or anything we do in our lives, just continue to live and to create and to exist. Because in fact, our existence is their failure. So I was talking to a friend of mine in Berlin who was born in Germany. His mother is German, and his dad is Palestinian, and he's a professor in a university, and in the last couple of years he has experienced endless harassments, for his being as a Palestinian, because in Germany it doesn't matter what you think or what you do. Being a Palestinian is a problem. And he told me something interesting, and I think is right. He told me, finally, we exist everywhere. And this is, in a way, our strength. And we should keep that, and we should work and continue creating and be. And as you said, communicate with the rest of the world, because finally, the cause of Palestine is a universal cause of all the dispossessed nations, all the injustices that happened in the past and happening today. And these are the connections that we should make always when we talk about Palestine, to compare, to talk about South Africa, to talk about the US, to talk about the natives in the Americas. Because it's important that we understand that we live in these conditions we are in as a result of European colonialism. I mean, the occupation of Palestine is a direct result of two European crimes. One is colonialism, and the second one is the Holocaust. And this is where we always have to make clear with whoever we talk to that this is where all began. Not because we are people who like to fight back and do uprisings, because this is the conditions we found ourselves in, and we have to fight back to exist.
No, well...
Do you have any comments?
I don't really... No, I mean, there were many comments as you spoke. but it's really, I'm not into doing a master class now. It looks very patronizing if I have to finish the night with something I am saying. So, no, I just want to thank you. Thank you.
I would like to say something before. I would like to say that I feel very incredibly thankful for the older Palestinian generation of artists and creatives and thinkers, because they have worked so hard through their own identity and through their own creativity and their excellency to be internationally, worldwide. And they have opened the door for us, the younger generation, to go through this, the same path when our stories have been, as Palestinians, have been excluded and erased. So thank you, Ilya. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you for everybody.
I changed my mind.
Yes.
I want to say something.
Say.
I think maybe because it should not. Sorry, I'll sit down to gain a little humility. I think if I have to calculate the number of times, and it's not a critique, that I heard the word Palestinian in this discussion, if it was money, I would be very wealthy. I think that you should also think that the intensity of this experience has its sense, its kind of universal sense. What you do is not necessarily simply Palestinian. And I think you should break that contextualization every once in a while. When you work on your painting, I think you only work without the nationality that you carry. I think you just work with your brush and your soul. That is the means by which the spiritual aspect of your work travels. And it's not Palestinian then. It is just what it is, and it just reaches wherever it reaches. Especially lately, when we have become quite a lot of us Palestinians, because there is a huge Palestinization of the world, by all means, all nationalities that are living today under a lot of oppression, a lot of suppression, a lot of censorship, and racism, and slavery, and military war machines, and all of that. So I think the Palestinian experience, in a way to its own advantage, has lost a little bit of its sense of specialness, luckily so, I would say. The other thing is, I think that when I do my work, I do not think at all of its Palestinianism. I only think of usually how, in the humor of the moment, I imagine how any kind of person, anywhere they are going to relate to this story. Normally the stories are not necessarily Palestinian, even if the people who are acting it are. It simply is an experience that a lot of people around the world are traveling. I do not believe that explaining Palestine really brings you far to tell people, read this or do that. The people will reach it through watching your film and watching your... Now, I think I have to separate, because this is to you, actually, not to Kamal, because I think Kamal is probably, doing just that. But I think because I heard you saying so many things about Palestine, and I think really when you reach Palestine simply by existing anywhere you are, by simply watching the work and enjoying and having pleasure, maybe even some humor from the work, and this is already very Palestinian. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. And I appreciate you staying for a couple of hours of discussion. It's really been an honor being with you. And thank you, Kamal, for sharing the film and sharing your own thoughts. Thank you, everybody. And see you at the exhibition, hopefully tomorrow. Thank you. Good night.